Most people don't realize when Camus enters their life. It doesn't happen when you first hear his name. It happens later in a moment that feels strangely quiet. You're doing something normal, something you've done 100 times before, and suddenly it feels distant. Not wrong, not painful, just hollow in a way that's hard to explain. Everything is still there. Your routine, your goals, your conversations. But something underneath, it feels disconnected. That feeling has a shape, and Camus understood it better than almost anyone. He called it the moment when the world stops answering you. Not because the world has changed, but because something in you has shifted. You start asking questions that don't come with clear answers. Why am I doing this? What is this all leading to? Does any of this actually mean anything beyond what I decide it means? And once those questions show up, they don't leave easily. This is where people usually think Camus is just describing something that already exists, that he is simply observing a truth about life, that he is being honest about the fact that meaning is not built into the world. But that's not the full story, because the way he frames this experience does something very specific to your mind. It doesn't just describe emptiness, it sharpens it. Camus builds an entire structure around the idea that the world is indifferent, that it offers no inherent meaning, no final answer, no deeper purpose waiting to be discovered. And at first, that can feel strangely freeing. You're not bound to some predetermined path. You're not required to follow a script written by something outside of you. You are open, but that openness comes at a cost. Because once you fully accept that the world does not carry meaning on its own, you start to look at everything differently. Not just in big philosophical moments, but in ordinary situations. Your work becomes something you are choosing to do, not something that necessarily matters beyond that choice. Your relationships become something you invest in, not something grounded in a larger sense of purpose. Your struggles lose the feeling that they are leading somewhere meaningful by design. Everything becomes optional. And when everything feels optional, it becomes harder to feel deeply committed. You can still care, but part of you knows that the meaning you feel is something you are creating, not something that exists independently of you. And that awareness changes the weight of things. It introduces a kind of distance. You are involved, but you also see through it. This is the tension Camus builds his philosophy around. The tension between your need for meaning and the world's silence in response to that need. And instead of resolving that tension, he keeps it alive. He calls it the absurd. And the absurd is not just an idea. It is an experience. It's the feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in place. It's the sense that your questions are real, but the answers are not waiting for you anywhere outside your own mind. It's the awareness that no matter how much you search, you will not find a final explanation that closes the loop completely. And here is where something subtle happens. The more clearly you understand this, the harder it becomes to ignore it. Because once you see the absence of built-in meaning, you cannot unsee it. You can distract yourself, focus on daily life, move from one task to another, but the awareness stays in the background, quiet but present. And over time, that awareness can start to color everything. Not in an extreme way, in a quiet, persistent way. Moments that once felt naturally meaningful begin to feel slightly constructed. Achievements feel less final. Goals feel less grounded. Even happiness can start to feel like something temporary, something that does not point to anything beyond itself. This is where people start to feel that emptiness. Not because their life has lost all value, but because the framework they are using no longer supports the idea that value exists independently of them. And that is a heavy shift, because it moves the responsibility for meaning entirely onto you. You're no longer discovering meaning. You're creating it. And while that sounds empowering, it can also feel unstable. Because if meaning comes from you, then it depends on you. It can change, weaken, disappear, or feel less convincing over time. It is no longer anchored to something outside your experience. It becomes something you have to maintain. And that creates a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure to find the right answer, but the pressure to keep believing in the answers you create. This is where Camus' influence becomes deeper than it appears. He doesn't just describe the absurd. He teaches you how to see it everywhere. And once you start seeing it, you begin to question things you never questioned before. Not because something is wrong, but because you now understand that there is no final guarantee holding anything together. Everything is contingent. Everything depends. And that realization, if you stay with it long enough, can begin to feel like a kind of emptiness. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a quiet sense that something essential is not there. And the more clearly you think about it, the more difficult it becomes to return to the way things felt before. Because you're no longer just living your life. You are aware of the absence beneath it. And that awareness does not come from nowhere. It is shaped, refined, made sharper by the way Camus teaches you to see. Once that way of seeing settles in, it begins to affect things you would never normally connect to philosophy. It changes how you wake up in the morning. Not an obvious way. You still follow your routine, still move through the same actions. But there's a subtle shift in how those actions feel. They no longer carry the same quiet assumption that they are part of something larger. They feel more self-contained, more isolated. You brush your teeth because you choose to. You go to work because you've decided it matters, at least for now. You talk to people because you value the connection. But underneath all of it, there's a faint awareness that none of these things are grounded in anything beyond your own decision to treat them as meaningful. And that awareness changes the texture of ordinary life. It doesn't destroy meaning. It makes it feel lighter, less anchored. And because of that, your relationship to effort begins to shift. Before, effort could feel like it was moving towards something that had weight beyond you. There was a sense that what you were building, improving, or pursuing had a kind of direction built into it. Even if you couldn't fully explain it, it felt real. Now, effort starts to feel more like maintenance. You are maintaining the meaning you have chosen rather than moving towards something that guarantees its own significance. And that difference is small on the surface, but over time it becomes noticeable. You start asking yourself whether what you're doing is still worth it. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, recurring way. And the more often that question appears, the more it begins to influence your motivation. Because motivation depends on a certain level of belief. Not blind belief, but enough to carry you forward without constant doubt. And when everything is seen as something you are creating rather than discovering, that belief becomes harder to sustain without interruption. You can still commit to things, but part of you always knows that the commitment is not backed by anything permanent. It is something you're holding in place, something that could shift if your perspective shifts. And that makes long-term direction feel less stable. This is where the idea of freedom starts to become complicated. At first, the absence of inherent meaning feels like freedom. You are not bound by external purpose. You are not limited by a predefined structure. You can choose your own path. But freedom without structure also means uncertainty without limit. There is no final reference point, no ultimate standard to fall back on. So every choice carries a kind of open-endedness that can become exhausting if you are constantly aware of it. You are free, but you are also responsible for sustaining that freedom in a way that still feels meaningful. And that responsibility does not switch off. It stays with you, in your decisions, in your priorities, in the way you evaluate your own life. You are always, in some sense, deciding what matters. And that constant responsibility can begin to feel heavy. Not because it is forced on you, but because there is nothing that removes it. This is where the emptiness becomes more than just a feeling. It becomes a background condition. Not something you're always focused on, but something that shapes how things feel even when you're not thinking about it directly. You experience moments of enjoyment, connection, success. But part of you remains aware that these moments do not resolve anything permanently. They do not lead to a final answer. They do not anchor your life in a way that removes the need to keep choosing, keep deciding, keep creating meaning again and again. And over time, that repetition can create a kind of quiet fatigue. You are not overwhelmed. You are not lost. But you are aware that nothing you do will close the loop completely. There's always more space, more openness, more lack of finality. and that can make even good moments feel slightly incomplete. This is the deeper effect of Camus' framework. It doesn't take meaning away. It prevents meaning from ever feeling fully settled. You can build it, shape it, strengthen it, but you cannot ground it in something that removes doubt entirely. And because of that, your relationship to certainty begins to change. You become less trusting of anything that claims to be final, absolute, or fully true. You see the limits of those claims. You understand that they are constructed, shaped by perspective, influenced by context. And again, there's value in that. It protects you from illusions, but it also removes something else. The ability to fully rest in something without questioning it. You're always aware of the possibility that things could be otherwise. That what feels meaningful now might not feel the same later. That what you believe today might shift tomorrow. And that awareness keeps you mentally active, but emotionally slightly distant. You are engaged, but not fully anchored. You are present, but not fully settled. And this is where the emptiness takes its most subtle form. It is not a lack of experience. It is a lack of final grounding. You are moving, living, choosing, but always with the understanding that nothing you choose will fully resolve the question you started with. And that understanding, once it becomes clear enough, does not go away easily. It stays in the background, quiet, persistent, shaping the way everything feels, even when everything looks completely normal on the surface. And this is the point where everything needs to turn, because if you stop here, it really does feel like Camus has taken something from you. It feels like he has stripped away the ground beneath your life and replaced it with something that never fully settles. You understand more, you see more clearly, but at the same time, something feels less solid than it did before. That's why people often describe this philosophy as empty. But the truth is more uncomfortable than that. Camus did not just reveal emptiness. He forces you to face what happens when you can no longer rely on borrowed meaning. Before this shift, a lot of what feels meaningful comes from structures you didn't create. Culture, expectations, shared beliefs, the sense that life is supposed to move in a certain direction. Even if you question parts of it, there's still a background feeling that something holds it together. Camus removes that, not by destroying meaning directly, but by making it clear that whatever meaning exists is not guaranteed by anything outside your experience. And once that becomes real to you, you are left in a position that feels unstable at first. Because now the question changes. It is no longer what is the meaning of life. It becomes what are you going to do with the fact that there is no final answer waiting for you. And this is where most people misunderstand him. They think the conclusion is emptiness. That once you see the absurd clearly, all that is left is a kind of quiet resignation, a sense that nothing truly matters in the way you once believed it did. But that is not where he stops. He pushes further, not toward a solution that resolves the tension, but toward a way of living inside it without collapsing. He rejects the idea of escaping it through false certainty. He also rejects the idea of giving up entirely. Instead, he holds both sides at once. You want meaning. The world does not provide it, and you continue anyway. Not because you have solved the problem, but because you have accepted that it does not need to be solved in order for you to live. This is where the shift becomes difficult to understand, because it does not give you something new to believe in. It takes away the expectation that belief needs to be final in the first place. And that changes the role of meaning entirely. Instead of being something you secure once and then rely on, it becomes something that exists in how you engage with your life moment by moment. Not as a fixed structure, but as an ongoing relationship. You don't create meaning once. You participate in it. And that participation does not require certainty. It requires presence. This is what people often miss when they say Camus makes life feel empty. He removes the illusion that meaning is built into the world in a permanent way. But he does not remove your capacity to experience meaning directly. In fact, he pushes you closer to it, but without the protection of guarantees. And that is where it feels uncomfortable. Because now, when something matters to you, you know that it matters because of how you are engaging with it, not because it is supported by something beyond question. And that makes it feel more fragile but also more immediate. You're no longer leaning on something outside yourself to justify your experience. You are inside it, fully responsible for it. That responsibility can feel like emptiness if you interpret it as a loss. But it can also be seen as a different kind of freedom. Not the easy kind, where everything feels open and light, but a grounded kind, where you're no longer waiting for permission from some external truth to care about what you care about. You choose it, again and again, not because it is guaranteed to last, but because it is real while you are in it. This is why Camus talks about continuing without appeal, without looking for something beyond the world to justify it. Not as an act of denial, but as an act of clarity. You see the limits, and you live anyway, not blindly, not passively, but consciously. This is where the feeling of emptiness can start to shift, because what felt like absence begins to look more like openness. There is no final answer closing everything down, but there is also no final limit preventing you from engaging fully with what is here. The world does not hand you meaning, but it does not stop you from experiencing it either. And that difference is subtle but important, because it moves you away from searching for something that will settle everything, and toward recognizing that nothing needs to settle everything for your life to be real, engaged, and meaningful in its own way. You are not solving the absurd. You're living with it. And that changes the question from what is the ultimate meaning to how are you going to live, knowing that there is no final answer waiting to confirm it. That question does not have a fixed response. It changes with you. And maybe that is the point. Not to reach a place where everything feels complete, but to stop needing it to be. Because once that need relaxes, even slightly, something else becomes possible. You're no longer holding your life against an invisible standard that it can never fully meet. You are inside it, experiencing it directly, not as something that has to justify itself, but as something that is already happening. And that shift, small as it seems, is the difference between feeling like everything is empty and realizing that nothing was ever meant to be filled in the way you expected.